support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Hi there and welcome to episode 114 of Down South Anomalies for the extraordinary Untold Radio Network. My name's Jay Cat.
And I'm Aspasia.
And where are we broadcasting from?
From Darragland.
From Darragland.
Yes,
we wish to acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging. We're in Sydney, Australia, but a very close comrade of ours, someone who I've admired for decades. And if it wasn't for this gentleman, so much culture in this country of ours would have been washed to the sideline. He is an incredible historian.
He is.
He's an amazing dilettante. He's an extraordinary writer.
Yeah.
He was a profound editor at SBS, which is our multicultural broadcaster here in Australia. He is one of the most decent, egalitarian individuals I've ever come across.
He is.
I cannot sing this man's praises
enough.
And he has given us the time today on his Alaskan holiday.
He has.
To appear in this incredible episode, Weird Alaska.
Yes.
And this gentleman goes by the name of Nick Shimmin. He runs an incredible open space in Sydney, Australia for musicians nationally and internationally.
Yes.
He doesn't take a cent from that space. He poured all his own funds into it.
Yes.
Every piece of money that's donated goes to every traveling artist.
That's right.
It's called the Red House, and we have loved it. And I've actually performed it there recently and threw myself over a lounge suite. It was one of the most exciting moments of my mid-60s.
You need to get out more.
Welcome to Untold Radio, Nick.
Thank you. Too generous as usual, but it was wonderful to have you throwing yourself over sofas. Although I was a little worried about the dog who was sleeping behind the sofa at the time, but he got out unscathed.
Yes.
He certainly did. So what brought you to travel to Alaska? And could you just move that laptop and show us where you're sitting right at the moment? I think people would be very excited. Look at that snow.
Yeah.
See all the snow.
And if you notice, there are massive, enormous footprints outside the window, but unfortunately, we've already debunked them.
They're not so anomalous. And Corinne,
Corinne.
Yeah.
There are Corinne's snowshoes. She had the huge snowshoes on. We walked right across the lake. We're very lucky to be in a house facing across a frozen lake in Fairbanks, which is right in the middle of Alaska, which presents its own issues. We did drive down to the big city of Anchorage on the weekend, which was fantastic, chasing the dog race. But one of the main reasons we're here is because Corinne has always had a profound fascination for the aurora. And so we're sort of aurora chasing. And Fairbanks is supposed to be just about the best place in the world. The Aurora Research Center at the University of Alaska is here in Fairbanks. And we've seen some. It hasn't been quite as intense as we would have expected at this stage, but we still expect to see more before we leave. So,
is there a particular time where it's best to, it's brighter and more spectacular, or is it pretty much the same all year?
There are a couple of sites which will tell you that, obviously the Aurora Research Centre informs you, so it gives you 3-hour blocks every night, identifying the intensity of the solar activity and what you're likely to see. From my point of view, I saw some quite good green lights the other night, and the thing that really struck me, I've never been hugely impressed by those photographs you see with all the lurid colours in the sky, because that just strikes me as being, gee, wow, pretty colours in the sky. But when you actually see it live, it's the movement and the transience of it and how a kind of ephemeral it seems. That's actually the beauty of it. Yeah. So that will move, and it'll only last for 60 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, maybe. And then it will disappear. And so you end up, if you're actually wanting to watch them, you end up kind of sitting up for hours waiting for the lights to appear.
Waiting for it to happen.
We've done a bit, yeah.
Do you think climate change, what's been happening to this planet? I mean, last year they were talking about seeing glimpses of the aurora there in Britain. So do you think that there's been an issue in the nature of being able to witness this thing as spectacularly as people did in the past?
I can't see that climate change would have had much impact because this is solar activity. I don't think it's, but you can see. I mean, we went to the start of the biggest event in Alaska to some extent is the Iditarod, which is the dog sled race every year, and this year for the fourth time they had to move the start here to Fairbanks, and very fortunately, it was about 500 meters away from the house down on the frozen river was where the race started yesterday morning. But they said that probably the start yesterday was the warmest temperature they've ever had for the start of that race. The 4 times they've had to move it north due to lack of snow down south has happened in the last 20 years. You just certainly get a sense here that this place is being affected by climate change. I think there's no doubt about that.
I mean, I first became aware of that race through the reality TV show based on Alaskan Air and that astounding family up there. And they always were like, some of the daughters got involved in that race, and it looks astounding, and it looks like you really need your wits and your strength about you, and especially to have really trained those huskies extremely well, because it can be quite treacherous.
Yeah, well, one of the competitors, we actually, when we were down in Anchorage, we were talking at a bar in Anchorage to the sponsor of one of the competitors, and he's the guy who's actually leading the race at the moment, and his great-grandfather actually founded the race, so he has a dynasty. The dog sled race, but he was saying, looking at the route is a little different from up here. They're going 2/3 of the route is actually along frozen rivers, and they've never actually done that before. But because the temperature is forecast to be, I mean, we're up to 0, which is very warm for the first week of March. He was actually choosing different dogs. So even, I mean, that gives you a hint that, you know, the adaptation is going to have to take place if the weather is changing at the rate it is changing. Of course, unfortunately, Alaska is ironically a major contributor to the process of climate change because they are drilling like crazy. And
it's full of resources, isn't it? It's just how much is there.
And, you know, the museum here, there was something... one of the very interesting, it's a very good museum in Fairbanks. It's up at the university, but one of the things that they were indicating was that right up on the north coast near Barrow, which is the only real town on the north coast of Alaska, the Arctic coast, they found just offshore a sort of sea shelf. I've forgotten what they've actually called it, but they've discovered rocks there which can't be from that area, that they must have been moved there possibly thousands of miles by geological processes. And because of the nature of the rocks, they've actually found sea life, vegetation, animals, which they haven't found anywhere else. However, and obviously conservationists are very interested in this, academics are interested in this, but the shelf area is entirely owned by Exxon.
And have a great and integrous relationship with the world.
Yes, exactly. It's not a good track record. To be fair to Exxon, they have been working with conservationists, and they built an island to drill, but they have built it away from the shelf, and they're drilling down and then across to get access to the oil and gas. So they're trying to keep the shelf undisturbed.
And they're under a lot of checks and balances because of their history. We're talking about 90,000 square miles of wilderness up there. We're talking about 11,000 islands. It's quite extraordinary. It's a reasonably sized landmass, isn't it? And apart from Hawaii, it's the only other American state. So you were going to illuminate us
away from the
land that's not connected to the continent. So a bit of that history on Alaska would be fascinating.
It's as ever when you travel somewhere like this and you spend some time here, you get a chance to familiarize yourself with the history, and it is particularly fascinating. I mean, one of the things about when Alaska became a state, which only happened in 1959, it increased the area of the United States of America by 20%, just adding that one state. It is that big.
It's as big as Rhode Island, isn't it? It's quite massive.
I mean, obviously the population is tiny, but as you say, the number of islands are astonishing. And I did discover, here's a good trivia night question. During the Second World War, was there ever a land battle in the USA? And most people, of course, would say no. Pearl Harbor was bombed, but there was never a land battle. Well, actually, yes. The furthest of the Aleutian Islands, which is the archipelago that goes all the way over towards Russia and Japan, the Japanese did actually invade Atka, the most remote island there, and they occupied it, and the US started evacuating the next few islands, expecting that the Japanese would go there. In the process, the US Air Force actually bombed the hell out of Atka, destroyed basically everything that was there, and when they moved back in, they discovered that the Japanese hadn't actually stayed, so they sort of destroyed everything that the people had in Atka. And then, obviously the resettlement process, there was internment going on as well, and they have rebuilt it to the extent that the native population of Atka is now actually quite strong. And they are recovering a lot of their culture, the dances, the language. And that is happening to a reasonable extent in Alaska. Obviously, the treatment of the native population here has been as bad as it has in most Western countries.
Why would it be any different?
Exactly. And when you travel to these places, you realize, so much of the stuff that we have done, that Canada has done, that most of these countries have done, was actually done in the US as well. Alaska is a very interesting case because in 1971, I think I'm right in saying, an act was passed which was pretty revolutionary, that the native people, and it coincided with a recognition amongst all the native peoples in Alaska that they had the potential to revive their identity and their traditions. So what happened in 1971 was an act was passed whereby a huge section of Alaska, a huge amount of the land was actually ceded to the native people, and billions of dollars was paid in reparations to the native peoples on that land. I don't know whether they can. Part of the payment was made so that the people could actually allow the pipelines to start being built from the north, from the Arctic. The native peoples, they were not railroaded into this. It was their decision. They accepted that. But one of the things that they did, which I thought was sort of interesting, because we didn't do that. When we had the Mabo decision and we introduced native title in Australia, we didn't actually include an exception. But what the 1971 Act did in Alaska was it granted native people title to that land and the money compensation, but at the same time they had to relinquish any title to all the rest of Alaska.
Right.
Wow.
So they'd basically given up title to everything else in Alaska other than that land that they were given in 1971.
run very parallel with our indigenous culture here, because you've got a culture that dates back tens of thousands of years, whose basic tradition was oral history.
Yeah.
Not the creation of mammoths, artificers, and lots of stuff lying around, but it's that oral history that's so important. And it's amazing how rapidly that history can be destroyed in terms of the length and breadth of it.
Yeah, it's true, and it also means that well-meaning white guys like us jump to conclusions about native cultures, which are very easy to maintain without any written record of a lot of the things we believe about them. So I suggested to you that I was actually going to read you a long passage, which will take us down another path.
Please do it. I mean,
there's a book here, Indian Legends of the Pacific Northwest, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's a collection of the stories.
When was that book written? Because I think we've got a copy of that in our storage space. I need to get to it. Amazing.
It's quite a while ago. This was published, I think, University of California, but it's a fantastic collection. 53, actually, this was published. Right. So, but it's got a whole heap of wonderful things in there, and you actually, the mythological aspects of it, the monsters and various other things, which are kind of really fundamental to the native peoples in Alaska.
Watch how you utilize that word mythological. To us here, it could be quite factual.
Well,
yes, this is one of the things I'm gonna, because the book I'm actually going to read from is not that one. It is this one. Now, I've always regarded Jonathan Raban as one of the great writers of the last 50 years. He's fundamentally a travel writer. He's written a couple of novels, but he wrote this book about a journey from along the coast of British Columbia and along the Alaskan Panhandle, passage to Juneau. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And what he writes about the native peoples and native culture and talking to the native people as he went along this route is really, really interesting. And there's one example of an anecdote in that book. There is one of the tribes along the Alaskan Panhandle has a first salmon ceremony every year. So basically, the first fish that is caught every year, they have a celebration, and they cook the fish and they eat the fish. The tribe eats the fish, and it has been interpreted by anthropologists and by all kinds of other people as basically just this kind of spiritual affinity that particular tribe has with nature and with the fish, and this is their worship of the fish and their celebration of the fish. Raban encountered some archaeologists who were doing tests on the way up the coast, and what they were doing is they were kind of drilling into the mud, and they were then testing the mud for traces of kind of the remains of fish. And they noticed that there were substantial changes in the fish populations, like every 10 or 20 years. Mm-hmm. And Raban suddenly thought, I wonder whether the ceremony is not actually about some kind of profound spiritual link and some worship of the fish. It's actually more like those sort of pagan festivals that you get in England when you get a bad harvest, or in Europe or whatever. And it's because you will always have a generation who have had seasons when the salmon haven't come.
Right.
And people have starved. And so what those celebrations actually are is an attempt to say to the salmon, please come back. Right. We need you. And then he went and spoke to the native people about this, and they said, well, yeah, of course. That's what it's about.
Okay.
And I think sometimes well-meaning white guys in particular, they romanticize history.
Yes.
And they try and actually, have some respect for that indigenous culture, but we bring all our own baggage attached to it as well.
And our own notion of why they're doing things.
Culturally anthropomorphized without actually doing the research and investigation.
Asking those people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So with that in
Well, there
mind,
you go.
the passage I'm going to read to you from this, because I really like what Raban says about all of this stuff, all of these subjects, is, bear with me, it's a couple of minutes. I'm going to read to you for a
I'd
couple
love you
of minutes.
to. Can I just quickly beforehand say that you're in Fairbanks, which is one of the most active UFO hotspots in the world. No kidding. Has had some of the most profound sightings. But in 2015 in Fairbanks, these things started to fall from the sky, the lamprey. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this with Corinne, but they have more than one. They don't actually have a jaw, but they have
like
circular teeth. Now, there were literally hundreds, thousands that fell from the sky, and the only thing they could put it down to, even though they found no solid evidence, was gulls. And maybe gulls had them in their mouths.
Seagulls?
And were flying across.
So a bunch of seagulls. So how many of them fell out of the sky?
Thousands.
Okay, so thousands of seagulls
got
together, were swooping into the water and pulling these fish or eels like.
People see them as slugs. They're revolted by them, basically. And imagine if they fell on their eye.
They look like eels.
They are pretty horrible.
And they were swooping into the water and pulling them out and flying up high all together and then just dropping them.
Well, is that the explanation?
Okay, all right. Well, you know, those seagulls, they can, when they organise, they really organise, don't they?
And you know what? They can grow from 5 to 40 inches in length.
Yeah, okay.
And their teeth wrap around everything and they just drain it out.
Okay. Amazing. There you go.
Anyway,
there aren't actually any seagulls in Fairbanks, so I don't know what time it is because we're right in the middle of the
some sort of bird they put it
Raven,
down.
probably raven. Raven is the dominant kind of figure in native stories, and raven crops up all over the place. It's probably raven.
But can ravens go into the water, like dive into the water and pull fish out like that?
I would not be surprised.
I don't know then.
You're asking me.
I'm just asking to know, because if you say, well, it's this bird, I don't know of raven being water birds. Okay.
They seem pretty capable of doing most things. There's an awful lot of them around. And they are very big birds.
Okay,
yeah.
All right, maybe.
H.P. Lovecraft
so a bunch of raven got
that is a holiday spot, you know?
Yes.
Who knows?
Yeah. Anyway, let's let Nick get to this passage.
People can research that stuff themselves. There's some questions.
I think so.
Yeah.
But it would be disturbing. I'm sorry, thousands of lampreys. Wouldn't like that at all.
I just loved also that notion of Charles Fort and the whole Fortean phenomenon of the fish falls, and these are very interesting.
They're very interesting,
fish, the lamprey. Anyway.
All right.
Okay. The yachtsman's pilot book for the area warned one to stay clear of the perfect shelter of Harlequin Bay on the east side of the island. We're down near Vancouver Island here, the north end, partly because of its rock-strewn entrance and partly because of its unfriendly inhabitants. Quote, one is advised against hiking to the east side of the island. Former residents have cited a hairy man, and strong evidence points to the existence of a Sasquatch family on the island, perhaps centered on Meson Cone above Harlequin Bay. Indian residents of nearby Balaclava Island have had similar experiences and now refuse to go ashore at either place. This book, John Chappell's Cruising Beyond Desolation Sound, was otherwise dryly informative, useful but dull. The Sasquatch paragraph was by far its liveliest moment. Chappell might as well have described the perils of getting too close to Kamogwa, who's one of the native tribes' dominant spirits, with appropriate latitude and longitude coordinates. The pilot book nicely reinforced the point made in the essay On the Cultural Track of the Sasquatch by Wayne Suttles. Quote, I do not think we can assume that Indian categories are the same as Western ones. I see no evidence of a dichotomy of real versus mythical or natural versus supernatural in Coast Salish thought. Between familiar creatures like the bear and the mink and fantastic ones like the thunder eagle and the double-headed flying sisutl, there stretched a smooth continuum of increasing rarity, ranging from seen most days by ordinary people to seen very infrequently and only by persons with special gifts. The Sasquatch lay somewhere mid-continuum and quite often was glimpsed by lay observers. Beyond it lay the pantheon of even stranger beings, animals capable of instant self-transformation and likely to wreak havoc in human affairs. Suttles wrote, "A description of Coast Salish culture that is truly emic, that is, organised by native categories, should describe whales and bears, Sasquatches and two-headed serpents, all under the same heading as part of the real world of the Coast Salish." It's a modest, common-sense statement, yet no anthropologist recognised its obvious truth. Even Claude Lévi-Strauss, the great cultural relativist, leaps for the word supernatural whenever he meets a creature in an Indian story that doesn't fit with his rationalist Linnaean version of nature. That Sasquatches and two-headed serpents should coexist on equal terms with other more common animals in a white pilot book, the same as in Indian tales, was endemic to this landscape of fogs and mists, long twilights, dense forests, thick soupy water, and mysterious, utterly inaccessible mountains and deeps. Identifying creatures on slight and fragmentary evidence by imaginative guesswork was always an everyday activity here. You had to act on a sudden displacement of the shadows in the trees, seen from the corner of your eye, or on the large, vague gleam of something moving in the water below your canoe. An 800-pound brown bear, seen standing on its hind legs as it craned to reach a bunch of high berries, would be a man-like hairy giant in anyone's book. The moment you assign a separate verbal category, giant, as distinct from the category bear, you are well up the road that leads to two-headed serpents and thunder eagles. The art and stories of the Northwest Coast, with their marvellous beasts and beings, reflect the inevitable mindset of a people who spent a great deal of their time peering apprehensively into the dark wood and the hidden depths of the sea, and saw their fears take monstrous shapes in that region lying just beyond the limit of normal 2020 vision. I think that's a pretty good account of a rationalist trying to conjure up and validate, if you like, the beliefs that the native peoples have here. And I quite like it. And I think, most of us white fella rationalists should actually start down that path.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect place to start. But have you been to Prince of Wales Island, where 12 to 15 foot cedar trees have been plummeted into the ground like this image here or here? 8 foot, 9 foot into the ground without avalanche, without landslide, with incredible eyewitness testimony that something anomalous is occurring there, and this may be the work of a parallel hominid. Who knows? Mm-hmm. So it's so interesting to see those roots. I don't know if you know of the Alaskan Glacier Gardens, which are a product of avalanche, and look what's happened there. Talk about, and they actually took advantage of an avalanche.
So an avalanche just, took all these trees down, and they ended up.
They brought in someone who was like a landscaper,
right? And
they said, "Let's take advantage of this.
Let's do something with this."
But very different to what you're finding here.
Yes.
In the Prince of Wales.
Yeah. And
there are, Nick, there are just more than little tales. There are stories that date way, way back, which is just phenomenal when you think about it. So let's just get a little taste of that.
In the 1940s, the small community of Portlock in Alaska was plagued by a series of eerie and unexplained events. These unsettling occurrences included the mysterious disappearance of Dall sheep hunters, discoveries of dismembered bodies in the lagoon, the discovery of massive 18-inch footprints in the snow, and even sightings of a ghostly lady in black. Alaska's legendary Sasquatch, locally known as Nantinaq the Half-Man, half-beast creature, similar to Bigfoot, was quickly blamed for these unsettling incidents. By 1949, the residents of Portlock had grown so unnerved that they began to relocate to nearby villages, leaving only the postmaster behind, and by 1951, the Portlock post office was officially closed. To this day, the question of what or who was haunting Portlock remains an unsolved mystery, shrouding the community's history in a chilling and enigmatic atmosphere.
The beauty is there that Portlock is just one place that has occurred. There are many, many fishing villages and islands.
What was that
have shut down. I told you not to ask me questions I cannot answer.
But you can answer. We watched that series.
I can't answer it now.
Alaskan.
Yeah.
It was an Alaskan village that the whole village had disappeared, like they'd left.
And it was a fishing village.
It was a fishing
I
village
couldn't tell you
because
the name of it, Aspasia.
the series was Alaskan something, and it was like years later, the descendants, the children and the grandchildren of the people that left that village years and years ago had gone back there and this was the show was about them going back to the island. And some really bizarre things were happening. You remember the show? Yeah. And some really bizarre, some really scary things. And they kind of left the place, screaming.
Well, when you've got 11,000 islands, and how many have you got in your native?
Oh, there's a lot of Greece. In Greece, there's a lot of islands. There's thousands of islands as well.
These stories are everywhere. But I think one of the biggest problems is that just astounds me that was 1959, And so recent oppressive takeovers of that population, the removal of their religious history, again, puts these things down to folklore and mythology. And I think we need a better word than that, because I think sometimes there's some truth there. There's some truth
absolutely.
there.
I mean, one of the dominant things about that description of that voyage was that the dominant theme of the book really is that all the way along that coastline, there are lots of abandoned settlements and communities, and he would kind of go onto land, and he would find evidence, carvings and rocks and stuff like that. And you do need obviously the recent abandonment is largely to do with money and commercial and whether sustenance, but earlier abandonments, there has to be some other kind of explanation for that.
Sure.
But one of the other really interesting things about that book, I thought, something I'd never thought about before, but he said all the populations that live, it's very interesting geographically because there's no actual roads into Juneau, even though it's quite a big city, so you have to get a ferry in. And that whole strip, the Alaska Panhandle, is wedged between the sea, which presents its own issues, and very high mountains. So there's just this very narrow little populated strip. And Raban suggests that for all of the native peoples who live along there, we need to invert our kind of land-loving white fella attitudes to the sea. That the native peoples along there, because they spend so much time on the water, regard the water in the way we regard the land. And so we regard the sea as something hostile, something wild, untamed, where, men go to die. And we feel much more comfortable on the land because we feel anchored there, we understand it. The native peoples along that coast are exactly the opposite, that they understand every single ripple in the water in terms of the current and how to negotiate it. They map it. They know how to get around all of the water there. But as soon as they look at the land, they see it as a realm of fear and danger and monsters. Right. And we need to completely invert the way we approach land and sea to understand the native peoples along that coast. And so all kinds of things get thrown up in terms of the stories and the beliefs if you start to think in those terms.
And that is a really interesting perspective to look at Alaska from. It has some of the largest lakes in the world that can instantly turn sour on you. And so even at this stage, many people still die out there that are pushing it too far in terms of their fishing. Another profound thing to me is what is in the water up there, because everything grows so large. You have the largest crabs in the world.
Yeah.
The halibut, the fish up there
Yeah,
are
sturgeon.
enormous sizes.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of lake monster stories that have been put down to the sturgeon, but they're massive.
Yeah.
You also have the largest mosquitoes in the world, snow mosquitoes. I couldn't imagine a night with those.
Yeah, right.
No.
So what is
we haven't encountered those, I'm quite pleased to say.
But it's fascinating from that perspective is, again, it is a completely unique ecosystem. And also the other thing from your
Just
perspective.
put some of those pictures up.
From the Glacier Garden.
From the Glacier
Do you
Garden.
know this garden at all? Have you been made aware of that?
No.
They're just stunning. I want one of those gardens. Oh my God, how beautiful is that? Hey? How beautiful is that?
Yeah. I mean, Nick, what's the music scene like there in terms of like experimental, abstract, independent? Have you been made aware of any of that at all?
No, not at all. It seems to be. I mean, there may well be things bubbling under, but we haven't encountered anything. One of the things we did encounter, again through sheer good fortune, the couple of weeks we're here, there's an awful lot on, not just the dog race, but the Native Arts Festival was on last weekend up at the university as well. And I think a lot of the cultural interest for people who actually want to explore things outside the mainstream is coming from that avenue. I think it's the songs, it's the chants, it's the dances. It's really fundamentally important to all the native populations up here. And it was pretty impressive. It was, you know, we really like being up there. So I think that's probably where it's coming from. I mean, I was saying to Corinne in terms of, you know, she has particular interest in the local languages, and we've kind of, you know, looked at a few of those. But I'm aware of only one recording by a popular musician in a Canadian native language, certainly nothing in Alaska. And so there may be things here, but I haven't encountered them yet. I mean, the distinctiveness of the culture, which again has been a bit of a surprise, certainly, and the strength of the native populations here, and possibly, you know, even, you know, what we're talking about, the fact that that the place is so remote, it's so wild, it's so fearsome, if you like, to all those people in the lower 48, was actually one of the reasons why it took so long for Alaska to be declared a state. Right. The history of that is extraordinary, and you know, America bought it off the Russians in 1867, and they paid 2 cents per acre, I think, is what they paid for Alaska from the Russians. Wow. And then it wasn't made even a territory of the US for some decades after that. The Russians sold it to the Americans largely because for the Russians it was a commercial enterprise, and they'd pretty much hunted the sea otter to extinction, and they were basically just here for the furs. But once it had become a US territory, then the campaign to turn it into a state really took off. But there were so many stages to it and so many attempts over the course of, I don't know, nearly 50 years, I think. And there were so many proposals. So there was one point where the Alaskan Panhandle wanted to secede completely and declare an independent state. There were proposals for the Republic of Alaska, of course. There were proposals to make it 3 separate states, 3 different regions of Alaska. And there was a proposal for it to become a borough of Washington State, and at the same time, Hawaii was going to become a borough of California. That was also proposed. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, we didn't get any of those things, and they did end up becoming states. But I do think it's that, you know, that foreignness and that, you know, unknowability of Alaska particularly, that probably, you know, made all those, you know, politicians in the lower 48 think, it's not really part of us. They're not like us. They're different. Because I can imagine them thinking that about Hawaii as well, because you know, the culture of Hawaii is so distinct and so different too.
But then bringing into an environment they're so unaware of and stating, look, you know, Here's a great example. Let's use a visual example. Are you aware in Cantwell of the proposed igloo city that collapsed? And this was to bring in like
we drove past that the other day. Yeah.
Wow, what shape's it in? Because these photos make it look a bit better. I think it's been graffitied to hell, actually. But
it actually looks at the moment a bit better than those photos you've got, I thought.
Great. Because it's an extraordinary structure.
So is that a hotel or what is
it? Well, it was proposed to be a hotel in a city.
Right.
But they broke so many regulations
to build it,
right, that in the end they had to cancel the project. It just wasn't worth it. And it reminds me of our beautiful Integratron. I mean, look at the woodwork inside in the construction of this. But what an extraordinary thing. So how far away is Cantwell from where you are with the rig?
Cantwell was, let me think, 2 hours north of Willow, so probably about 2.5 hours south of here. But it's on the highway. You do actually drive past it. We stopped at Cantwell on the way back because when we were driving back, we drove through a blizzard and we just wanted a break after when we got to Cantwell. Cantwell is, I think, now largely a native community. So, I mean, I as I say, I was fascinated by that when we drove past it, and I thought, oh, that's got potential for rehabilitation by someone a little better than Clive Palmer, because it does kind of strike me as,
by yourself. I mean, I can see like the Alaskan Red House,
the igloo house,
absolutely,
the igloo house,
the White House.
That is just so phenomenal for traveling artists and musicians.
Probably got great acoustics in there as well.
Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah.
The other one is a theme park I'm fascinated by. Have you heard of Muck Luck Land?
No, I haven't. But I was reminded of the term Muck Luck recently. Yes, there's a theme park.
There's a theme park.
It is one of the most out of control, derelict theme parks in the world that still operates, I believe, to a certain extent. There's the entrance to Muck Luck Land.
It's not very impressive.
There's a brighter photo. The next one. Just go down to that. Here's some
not that impressive.
Here's some of the attractions you can see at Muck Luck. Futuristic designs.
That's fantastic.
There's definitely a field of like literally dozens of rusted snowmobiles.
Yep.
Here they are
showing
their love for great American situation drama like MASH. Recreating the
MASH, the 4077.
And they have this very sinister doll's house. And look, if you're on audio, get up to YouTube and watch this. If you see down here in the right-hand corner, urging towards the middle, you can't go into this doll's house. It's restricted. And if you go any further, you're going to put your foot into a bear trap. They've got a bear trap. The bottom there. They don't want to let you in.
Yeah.
And then they might have the odd disused fire engine. So that's a little bit of Muck Luck Land for you.
That's the theme park, is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that is superb. I do want to go there. I kind of hope it's still open.
It's, ask around. I'm sure that.
I mean, we'll see.
I must say though, even just the bit of driving that we've done, because obviously, we have a decent car here. We exchange with the people we swapped houses with, but we're not going that far off major roads,
right? But
even on those roads, the amount of abandoned stuff, on the properties off to the side of the road is absolutely fascinating. And if we had more time, I would actually do a trip. I mean, it's a 6.5 hour drive down to Anchorage, so it actually took quite a while. But if we had more time, I'd be stopping along the way, photographing some of that stuff, because it's in that vein and it's very beautiful.
Well, you need to do it again and secure yourself a container and bring that in on one of those dock sites so that all the illegal tobacco's coming in, so you'll have freedom to just get it through. What about the islands? What about
Iliamna Lake Monster? Iliamna Lake is located in the northern foothills of the Aleutian Range, Alaska. It shares its name with the river that flows into it. It is the largest lake in Alaska and the third largest lake in the United States. Now, the locals have a few stories about a presumed lake monster. Some believe that this creature could easily be an undocumented population of white sturgeon. If true, it would be the northernmost known population, just a few hundred kilometers from the Arctic Circle. Jeremy Wade, the host of the show River Monsters on Animal Planet, is among those who believe it is a white sturgeon. Others speculate that it could be a Pacific sleeper shark. In 2017, there were several new reports, and the Anchorage Daily News, a newspaper published in Alaska, offered a prize of $100,000 to anyone who could provide undeniable evidence of the creature's existence.
You know, there was even some great footage, and I didn't get that up. I was worried about stepping on someone else's rights that were filmed there of an object that looked like it was a fish, but it was at least 20 foot long and moving and had ice cake to it. And this footage went for quite a few minutes. So it's quite interesting. Are you getting to any of the islands, Nick? Excuse me.
Not to the islands, no. One of the problems, I mean, we choose to be here at this time of year, but traveling around there aren't that many roads in Alaska anyway. The traveling around is tricky, and you'd need to go by plane. I mean, it is sort of fascinating, the number of small planes up here, because it's the only way really to get around. And looking at the route of the dog sled race as well, I mean, you couldn't follow it in any other way along the rivers. I mean, the rivers are extraordinary. They're immense and massive as well. And talking about the size of things, you know, the lakes are so big, the rivers are so immense and so kind of diverse and winding. Of course, the highest mountain in North America is here as well. When you drive past that on the road down south too, and it's spectacular. I'm sure there's all kinds of stories associated with Denali. So yeah, it's again, it's another one of those. The size and the foreignness of the place is consistently striking, and we've only seen a bit of it. You know, I would love to go up to the North Coast, up past the Arctic Circle, up there. But one of the problems they've got up there, of course, as well, with the climate change thing is the permafrost is melting.
Right.
And so the sea is getting closer and closer to the settlements. And there is one entire village that's had to be relocated 50 kilometres inland because the permafrost was melting. And I think even Barrow up on the North Coast, I think the coastline, I mean, it basically encroaches like meters every year. It comes closer. Right. And, you know, this is going to be a, you know, major problem that I don't know who's responsible for that. You know, does the federal government have to deal with that? Does the state government have to deal with that? Because most of the population up there is going to be a native population. Are they, you know, going to be abandoned? It's, you know, entirely possible.
Yeah, well, you know, you were speaking before and you showed us those footprints of you and Corinne walking out there, and then you actually said to the person whose house you're in, you know, how long can we walk on that lake? And she suggested not much
longer. A little bit longer.
What's it like driving there, and do you have to permanently have snow chains on, and how do the blizzards, they just come out of nowhere? Can you predict them?
Yeah, we were surprised at that blizzard on the way back. And it went for, you know, we were driving through it for about 50, 60 miles. It was incredibly beautiful because, you know, it basically just covered all the trees with snow and everything, but it was a bit hairy, and obviously everyone had to go slower. The weird thing is there are no snow chains here. None of the cars use chains.
Right.
They of course, most of them drive huge trucks. You know, the other interesting thing about Alaska is that every car here actually has a little plug at the front of the car, because when it gets to minus 40, if you have to park your car outside, you can't start it again. So all the car parks actually have sockets where you actually take the extension lead and you plug the car in to start it up. So they all have plugs sticking out of the front of them, all the cars here. Wow. I mean, Corinne has done most of the driving here, and it's a little hairy. I mean, you have to change your behaviour, because the roads remain icy. It just doesn't melt. So the snow falls, it gets compacted, the ice stays there, and it doesn't melt from months.
You're skiing. You're on. Yeah.
Isn't that remarkable? Because I always fall back on my wife as the safest, most pronounced driver, and even though I spent years driving lots of people around in buses, but she always seems to be the one with the greatest strength when it comes to that moment of failing eyesight as you age or treacherous roads. So I guess give Corinne our blessing for keeping you safe, you both safe in the midst of this. It's just so fascinating. Now, I don't know if you're aware, and I don't have any footage of this, but Aspasia and I really are astounded every time we reflect back on that Japanese air flight 1628 in 1986. It was a cargo flight that had an encounter
over Alaska,
over Anchorage with an object that was 4 times the size of an aircraft carrier. It was detected on radar. It was visually detected. It was detected by land, the actual tarmac. It had so many qualified eyewitnesses. And as I said, the sighting lasted between 20 to 30 minutes. The Japanese pilot had 30 years experience and was completely freaked out. And by the time they sent jets up to intercept, by the time that had happened, it was all over. But it is a case that I think anyone interested in ufology and the notion of Alaska being this incredible hotspot for sightings, it is one case that is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to debunk. That was 1986. That was JAL Airlines 1628. And it's all over the web. You can look up that case, and it is fascinating and still stands true today. And I guess in an area like that too, you've got so much science occurring. You've got the HARP, which is the most astounding project surrounded in mystique and conspiracy. The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up there. You have lots of extraordinary equipment in which you can actually monitor anomalies that appear. Now, everyone has said that this is all about understanding what's happening, and hence the Aurora Borealis, but understanding what's happening to our ionosphere.
I doubt it.
But people have spoken about it as being weather engineering. It's an amazing array of antennas. Did you get to have a peek at that, or is that just somewhere where you're not, Nick?
No, I mean, I would have liked to, because I do like these kinds of things. I mean, I'm always inclined to think a lot of this stuff is to do with surveillance and communications interception as well, because the stories behind that in this region, up in the Arctic region, there's a multiplicity of stories about the various attempts to kind of, because of course, Alaska is the closest thing to Russia. And we're not just talking about the proximity across the Bering Sea. We're actually talking about proximity across the Arctic as well. And so the Russians, when they've tried to build communications interception centers, have built them way up north in the Arctic, because it's the most accessible place for them to intercept communications from North America. So I always think things like, well, I mean, it's very difficult to believe that Alaska wouldn't be a center of that kind of government activity as well.
Sure.
Fascinating. I think that's a really extraordinary point. And the other thing I didn't get photos up, and I keep myself over this, is the Goose Creek Tower, the 185-foot house that's like 15 feet below civil aviation regulations. It's a house on top of a house on top of a house on top of a house.
Right.
And they call it the Dr. Zeus house.
All right, okay.
Which I find...
How did you forget to get that?
Well, I just missed it out on the stills. Have you heard about that? There's a lot of unusual architecture up there.
Yeah, no, we did see that on the road as well. Which is pretty extraordinary. I mean, I from the distance, I likened it to a kebab. Actually, it was kind of,
it does look a little like that. Now you say that.
Yeah, it was fairly extraordinary. Didn't get any photos of it, but yeah, I think there is. I mean, there's also I think that there is this other kind of sensibility in places like this, that people are prepared to go out on a limb a bit more because it's perceived as being extreme, it's perceived as being fringe, and so even architects, and of course, the conditions will demand, a certain kind of, creativity and problem solving.
There's not much to do, I'd say, with that kind of cold. You can't be out in the cold. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to be coming up with all kinds of weird and wonderful things.
Now, Corinne, before you packed and decided to go on this trip and chase the Aurora, Corinne is a meticulous, highly intelligent academic. Did she brush you up, Nick, because you're a bit like us. You get a bit roguish and excited, and I don't mean that to be offensively. I can embrace you for those qualities, but there are very specific laws in Alaska. And did she make you aware of any of those laws? Like, it is illegal to wake up, and who in their right mind would ever do this, a sleeping bear?
Wake up a sleeping bear.
It is totally illegal. Okay. You can be fined.
Obviously,
for doing
some idiot woke up a sleeping bear.
And that's where the laws have come from. But I would have thought the punishment would be what the bear would do to you, not the legal system.
That's right. If there was any left of you.
Why do you need to pass a law for that? I mean, just let nature take its course there.
Exactly.
And these laws, as you said, there's no smoke without fire. They have to have started from an incident.
Absolutely.
That set the precedent.
Yeah.
So it is illegal to push a moose out of an airplane in flight.
I can imagine the lobbying by the moose population to get that law passed. The moose would have been very keen to get that passed. Yeah, we have seen moose wandering around, which is very nice. This was another major thing on my bucket list for Alaska. We wanted to see moose, and we have seen a few of them. The most interesting sighting was outside Domino's Pizza. Down near the university, and the woman in the car park, of course, being tourists, we immediately jump out of the car to take photos.
You can't, they're dangerous
when we see them. But there was a woman in the car behind me when I was taking photos. She wound her window down and said, "There's one coming behind you." And there was another one coming. And I couldn't understand at that point whether she was being animated about it because it was dangerous or because she thought I should turn around and take a photograph of it. I wasn't too sure. But it just wandered past.
They're dangerous. Yeah,
moose apparently are really not. They are completely indifferent to humans. They're not like muskox. Muskox are problems. Muskox are dangerous. Muskox will charge.
What about caribou?
Caribou we haven't encountered. I think I haven't actually investigated whether they're dangerous or not. But there's
reindeer antlers. They could really make damage of you, but I guess the moose could as well. I mean, I've seen enough Rocky and Bullwinkle to be scared. But
I agree. And one of the things about moose, however, that has been a disappointment is, of course, this is my ignorance of the thing, that the moose in winter don't have antlers. They drop them at the end of summer every year. And then they grow these huge antlers again every year.
Wow.
The other thing there you could be doing and making a bit of money to cover your expensive trip over there with Corinne is there is some of the most legally appropriated ivory that dates right back from mammoths.
Oh, right.
The woolly mammoth. And there are stories from the indigenous population that they hunted woolly mammoth.
Sure.
And even in the 1800s, and I need to go to the newspaper archives, there were sightings by scientists of mammoths' footprints that were fresh, evidently.
Yeah, right, okay.
So there's a particular word for it, but it's ethical ivory.
All right, yeah.
And it dates way back.
Well, if you dig it up, they died naturally, and you're digging it. You're not hunting them, but
I was surprised to see an ivory shop here, actually. I did see an ivory shop here.
It's
and I was
ethical ivory. And isn't it bizarre that today, because Colossus, that are in charge of the DNA rehabilitation project, they want to take on the thylacine, they want to bring back the woolly mammoth, but they brought back, well, not yesterday, but they announced to the public, and I haven't got imagery of this, the woolly mouse, which is one step away from the mammoth, which is like an extremely hairy mouse that was found in that area. Right. I mean, this is a mouse.
Big mouse.
Well, it's a mouse that looks like a mobile piece of a shag pile carpet.
Right, okay.
And they have successfully evidently brought that back.
Why?
it's not the original one. It's a matter of gene splicing and fiddling around with elephants and all sorts of things. But they reckon they're on the way to bringing the mammoths back.
Okay, so they haven't seen enough of the movies of what's going to go wrong every time. Like they haven't seen Jurassic Park, right?
No, they haven't.
Clearly not.
No.
Anyway.
But let's face it, we would all be advocates of having these animals come back and actually take over the planet because we are making such a mess of it. I think the animals should.
Yeah, well,
if we gave the planet back to them, I would advocate that. But I always think we've got to go back to that beautiful Miss Shelley and Frankenstein, and there's always trouble when you try and bring things back. It's like going back to a stale relationship. It's never the same again, and crap always goes down.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the parallel hominid, there's someone I do respect, and that's the non-evangelical Bear Grylls.
Yeah.
Lestrade, Survivor Man. Let's just have, and I hope he respects us for screening this and doesn't attack me, but he had an incident in Alaska that led to an incredible series of investigations and programs by him. He is the ethical survivor.
On July 27th, 2007, while filming a scene from my Survivor Man Alaska show, I was distracted by noises in the bush about 100 yards away. If you watch me in these scenes, you can see times when I momentarily look off into the bush on a number of occasions. I was wondering what the sound was. I'm used to sounds in the bush, so I wrote it off as a moose or a bear, and carried on shooting the scenes of making a grass bed for my shelter. But eventually, I finished capturing the footage I needed, and shut off the cameras. As I walked towards my shelter, I heard a hair-raising, extremely loud sound that could only be described as something like a great ape grunting at me. I've heard many bears grunt, and this was nothing like that. What's more, it repeated it 4 more times very loud while I stood frozen in my step.
Now, he is the skeptic to end all skeptics.
Yeah, well,
and he's a great musician as well, but he is a brilliant survivalist, and he doesn't take a film crew with him.
No, he doesn't.
So there's none of all that playing around. You've got 20 people and lights sitting over there. He is distinctly by himself.
I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm all alone out here, and there's like a crew all around. Lights, camera, action,
So, look, Nick, we just thank you so much for your valuable time. You're on holidays, and you very rarely get that.
It's been a pleasure. It's one of the great things about this kind of holiday, that you actually have time to do things like this, and to, I do like to have the time to think about things and discuss these kinds of things when you're in a place, rather than going from place to place all the time, traveling constantly, to settle down and kind of absorb something about the place. Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's about not just, because when you go from one thing to another, do you know what I mean? You don't give your mind enough time to actually absorb it. And not just that, but to absorb it and think about it and mull it over and really take in the nuances of what you've seen. Because when you're on to the next one, it's like, oh, wow, well, let me look at this, let me check this out. And it's like, and then you're just piling information on top of information, and it just becomes a blur after a while.
It does.
Whereas if you really stop and think, it's like eating a meal. Instead of just throwing it and shoveling it in and not hitting the sides and really tasting it. Whereas if you sit and just eat it slowly and contemplate it, it's a totally different experience. You know what I mean? And doing that is, I think, always just being present in the moment instead of going from one thing to the other, fast and missing it all.
I just really appreciate the fact that you are that same inquisitive, creative, and insightful individual, no matter where you are, but you'll take your holidays in Alaska. We need to think outside of the square, people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I would recommend it. Anyone that wants to come to Alaska. I mean, we think we'd like to come back in summer because obviously it'd be completely different. There would be a lake out there instead of frozen waste.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to walk on it.
I suggest you don't walk on it anymore.
Yeah.
I suggest you take the advice of the lady that's there that knows that area. Don't walk on it tonight.
In summer, would you be able to swim in it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
I imagine it would still be fairly cold, though.
Sure. But there's nothing, scary in there? Or,
well, who knows?
Who knows? Okay. I mean, a lot of the indigenous population, as you were saying before, still live off the water and the sea there.
The land.
What have you been eating? Are there any unique Alaskan food that you partake?
It's just, I mean, they're really big on. I mean, clearly, you know, it's kind of frontier culture, and they're still pretty big on the meat and the fish. But it is all really good. It's local. It's, you know, yeah, you can get reindeer hot dogs. We did actually indulge in reindeer hot dogs. We have not encountered moose burger yet, but I suspect we might at some point.
All right. Well, we so appreciate your time. We want you both to be safe and come back to us. We've got so much creatively to do with both of you this year. And we just thank you so much for being part of Down South Anomalies. It's just a joy that you'd said you'd do this interview, and it's somewhere we've wanted to talk about for a long, long time.
Yep.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm now going to go and investigate Mukluk land because
Yeah. Well, let's hope you have a romantic, beautiful time there. Give Corinna our love, and take very good care. And we'll see you back here in the sad-ass city of Sydney soon enough.
We'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. All right, kids, we will be back. We will be back next
and
week.
we're following with the series of interviews.
I wanted to say something in the beginning about missing last week because we weren't there.
It was 113, so there's always going to be a hiccup.
Well, we missed a week, because we just all these interviews that we had fallen through, and you know, they're all banked up, ready to go at any moment, and we just didn't want to do another. You know, just us rambling.
And we had so much work on.
We
had the Mardi Gras.
Pancreas. I was making a 2-meter pancreas, you know, for the diabetes foundation and blah. And we had just so much on that we just went, okay, let's not.
And I lost my voice. I was running around the street to thousands of people screaming, "That is a pancreas, not a penis."
Yes. Anyway. So, yes, excuse us for our not being there last week, but, it was a one-off.
But I want you to realise, people, that Nick Shimmin is an extremely important individual because he is so egalitarian. He gives, he never takes.